See, you see how he's like, there's no evidence. He literally just said there's no evidence for it, and then in the next sentence, it's not that there's no evidence for it, and then stay tuned for part 2 when we go over why it's impossible. My guy, if there is no evidence or barely any evidence, why not look at that evidence and then bring it against the multitude of evidence? Why are you just disallowing all that, right? We want to see both sides. We want to be objective in our criticisms and in our studies, right? All right, I guys, doing today, we about to hop into a little reaction. The first things first, though, just make sure you like that video. Like it full screen, scroll a bit, like it, and then full screen it back up. You feel me? So today's my birthday, and as such, we have a great video because I don't have to think too much. But ever since I started doing apologetic or learning about apologetics and everything, I've been very fascinated with Noah's Ark and how that relates to a lot of what we see that modern science will claim that the earth is old, because a lot of what Noah's Ark is the deposition of rocks and the switching up of like all that type of stuff, moving to the fossils, rapid fossilization of animals and all that. So it sets the boundary of what people call the sediments and the rock layers, and like, this one's millions of years old, the one above it slightly younger and younger and younger, but it goes back to 4.6 billion, and all these animals, the fossil record indicates that blah blah blah, and whoop-de whoop-de whoop, and you get the point that it's just like, this is what they're trying to use to say that the Bible's not true because of all the science. However, Noah's Ark is the thing that ties it all together, right? And for me, I remember I was looking for verses, and I don't even know how I came upon it, but in Psalms, there's a line where David says, and you have set your bound over something. And what that bound is what is, I think, in reference to what's called the KT boundary, which is supposedly the boundary where the meteor hit the earth and sprinkled a layer of, it's been a minute since I read about it, iridium, a layer of iridium all over the earth, because the asteroid hit, sent sediment up into the air, and it was raining down, and that's what killed the dinosaurs and all that, right? And so there's an iridium layer all across, because iridium is commonly found in asteroids, so there's an iridium layer all around it. But the psalm says you've set your bound so that water may not come upon the earth again, and that bound, I think personally, is in relation to the flood. Maybe an asteroid, but not in the sense that we think, right? I think it's more in relation to the flood. Like, this is when the flood happened, the dinosaur fossils, blah de blah, all the other fossils and the sediments and the rock layers and all that type of stuff. So he set the bound so it shouldn't happen again, because God said, I will never destroy the world, or I will never destroy all of humanity with water again, right? And that's the sign that we have with the rainbow, which could be talking about the rainbow, but it's a bound. When it's talking about the rainbow, it calls it a bow. And I haven't looked at the actual like Aramaic or Hebrew words for that word, which I probably should. But regardless of the fact, let's check this video out.
As many as 40% of Americans believe in a global flood, usually the literal story of Noah. But what if I showed you how we know for an absolute fact that this story never happened? Young Earth creationists who hold to a literal Bible love to cast doubt on science by saying things like,
when we're talking about origins, we're talking about the past. We're talking about our origins. We weren't there. You can't observe that.
before encouraging their viewers to believe in a book written ages after the events it describes by other people who weren't there. But unlike the authors of the Bible, science can give us a window into the past. Just like a crime scene investigation, we can examine clues to find out what actually happened in our long-forgotten history. Now, I'm not going to focus on the reasons why Noah's Ark would be physically impossible. I'll cover that in part 2, but in this video, we're going to explore 12 pieces of evidence that blast a cannonball-sized hole in the global flood narrative and show us beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Earth was not covered entirely with water. Number 1, ice cores. In permanently frozen parts of Antarctica and Greenland, snow and ice layers get deposited and compressed every single year. The chemistry of Earth's atmosphere fluctuates throughout the year, and we can measure this in the ice core layers by slowly melting the core onto a metal plate and measuring the exact chemical makeup of each layer.
The primary dating chemical we're using is from sea salt. So we're using sodium, magnesium. Okay. Get a beautiful signal that shows every annual layer.
From summer bubbles to winter dust, we can clearly see, measure, and count annual layers, similarly to how you would count tree rings, except much more precisely.
Some of the elements that we measure in parts per quadrillion And to visualize that or to get a feel for what that actually means is we're looking for a second in 33 million years.
Scientists also measure annual fluctuations in acidity using electrodes. So we have 3 different ways of measuring these ice cores. Some of these cores at Vostok and Dome C go back 800,000 years, showing normal seasonal variations with no chaotic slurry layer or any other evidence of a catastrophic global flood. Number 2, lake varves. Just like with ice cores, certain peaceful lakes like Japan's Sugetsu will deposit alternating light-dark sediment pairs every single year based on the season. Again, counting them is like counting tree rings. There are over 52,000 of them, unbroken, undisturbed, and entirely flood-free. Number 3, dendrochronology. Most young Earth creationists place the flood at about 2,348 BC, but we have single standalone trees older than that, which have been continuously growing undisturbed for 4,900 years. And we have significantly older tree colonies, like the Pando aspen colony in Utah, that's been consistently growing for over 10,000 years, none of which would have survived a year underwater. They didn't drown, they didn't restart from a seed, and they sure as hell didn't sprout on an ark. Number 4, archaeology.
I don't know about that. You don't know how this flood worked. You don't know how God worked in terms of that. You can't just say, we know that this didn't happen in that sense, right? The other 2 things you mentioned, tree rings, I'm not familiar with that, so I can't say how accurate or inaccurate that I think that is, or whatever the case is. But most of my criticism came from like rock dating and saying that Earth was 4.6 billion years old or whatever the case was. This stuff, not as much familiar with, which I'm glad to be because I like learning new stuff and trying to have to defend my faith a little harder, right? And I don't have any degrees in science. I don't study science. I don't know if this dude does. I don't even know what his channel is about. Let's look at his description real quick, see if he's got it. Welcome, I'm enthusiastic about science, creating a technologically world advance, raised a missionary kid, no longer believe in the supernatural, Soviet Muslim country before the fall of the Berlin Wall. My love of science made me question everything. I'm a skeptic of all paranoid now. People loving humanist with a childlike awe of the cosmos. I try to base all my videos on the pillar of free thought, critical thinking, and scientific skepticism. Freely question everything because truth withstands scrutiny. You can be free, dare to be curious. So, you know, I guess he has a basic understanding of science. No mention of degrees, which, you know, isn't a criteria, but like I think it helps because when I'm talking to my biologist friend, you know, he's studying biology, so I take more what he says with higher levels of, oh, he does understand some stuff, because, you know, as a non-science person, my opinion definitely is very low on the totem pole when it comes to understanding scientific principles and all that stuff. So I'm just wondering to what level this guy has been educated in the realm of science to where he can say these things and have it be unchecked, if that makes sense, right? So let's continue.
We literally have cities that have been continuously occupied since before the flood allegedly took place. Hell, Jericho has occupation going back 12,000 years. Apparently, all of these civilizations were trading and waging war and farming and perfecting pyramid building techniques, and yet somehow never got the memo that they were supposed to be underwater. Number 5, coral reef.
I mean, I don't know what our dating methods are for stuff like that, right? I did a bunch of the rock stuff. Like, I don't think the Earth is 4.6 billion years old, nor do I think, however they're dating these things, I wonder if we even have that right? Because my whole thing was with the Mount St. Helen thing, not the whole thing, right, but a small piece of the argument was that if Mount St. Helen, we know the year of the age, why is it such a small gap, or my bad, why is it such a large gap that we have to try to guess inside of, right? Why does it have to be over 30 or 300,000 years old before we can tell accurately the age? Why can't it be any year? Why can't any amount of gas be released and we know, right? And I guess it's like, oh, you know, the half-lives, the gas didn't break down, sure, but it has to be 300,000. There's no gas present until 300,000 years. There's no proportionate amount of magnesium, argon, whatever, the potassium to argon before 300,000 years, you know what I'm saying? And then with the tree rings and all that, I don't know how they test that and all that, so I'm not too familiar, but let's continue.
Coral reefs only grow a couple of millimeters a year, and like trees, we can measure annual growth.
You split them open and you x-ray them, and they're like trees. People are very familiar with tree rings, that you can count the tree rings and go back in time. Well, the corals produce these annual bands.
We've taken drill cores from coral and the Great Barrier Reef, which show continuous growth phases going back more than 400,000 years. But corals occupy a very fragile ecosystem. Change their temperature ever so slightly, they die. Change the salinity or pH level of the ocean, they die. If you were to pump the ocean full of muddy freshwater chaos for even a week, much less a year, they wouldn't stand a chance. Number 6, speleothems. Every year, stalactites in caves slowly grow. Extremely slowly. Drip by drip, the calcium deposits build up, forming measurable isotope stripes, preserved in chronological order. If a global flood had churned the planet into a muddy blender, these fragile speleothems would have snapped like spaghetti. Instead, at caves in the Alps and in Carlsbad Caverns, these perfectly preserved structures have stood pristine for over 500,000 years. Number 7, genetics. We can precisely measure a species' genes, and based on genetic diversity, determine if that species almost went extinct, and if so, how long ago. Cheetahs, for example, were nearly wiped out 10,000 years ago, and now every single cheetah is practically an identical twin. Now, if every single species on Earth had a genetic bottleneck of just 2 members, followed by generations of inbreeding, that's what we would expect to see in every animal's DNA test. Instead, with the vast majority of species alive today, we see the exact opposite. Massive genetic diversity across a species. Number 8, dirt. The soil beneath your
Hey, I'm no expert. I'm just gonna say he's making some great points. I don't really know how to defend him other than saying like a supernatural flood event, which I think we do have good evidence for, could definitely go against this type of thinking of just like, you know, because of this, it couldn't have happened. Because of this, it couldn't have happened. Because of this, it couldn't have happened. I think it's more necessary that we look at the pros that it could happen. Because everybody, I'd say more people, he said 40% of people think a global flood happened. The majority of people think it didn't happen. So why not take the lesser side and look at all the cases for it and rather just going against it, right? Imagine kicking somebody when they're down. And I'm not pointing at it from a moral argument. Like, his stance is wrong, but I'm just saying, like, if the majority of people believe it didn't happen, shouldn't we be looking at why it did happen, not the other way around? Because I don't think a lot of people that think it happened know why they think it happened, right? I think they just think it happened because it's like, oh, it says so, so I believe it. And that's called blind faith, right? But I think some level of research has to go into why you would choose to believe something, right? It's got to be something greater than just, you know, something greater than God talked to me, so I believe the Bible, so I believe Noah's flood. Because a lot of people, I would assume, right? I don't know for sure, but I think a lot of Christians don't even know if they believe the whole young earth creationist thing, right? Because we talked about this before with the indoctrination of our kids to this millions of year old earth with the things like the evolution scale of like monkey walking to human walking, that thing. And then also like just dinosaurs being like, dinosaurs are a million years old. They indoctrinate them young because kids love dinosaurs, you know. And then we still have debates on if the moon landing was fake or not. Science will say we've been to the moon. Regular people are saying we ain't go to the moon. How is it not 100% crystal clear if we went to the moon or not? How was that not 100% crystal clear? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's stuff like that where if we're not even sure if we went to the moon, how can I be sure that all of our science is right? It's kind of stuff like that, if you get what I'm saying.
feet contains an incredibly diverse balance of bacteria, archaea, fungi, protozoa, and nematodes. These organisms play essential roles in nutrient cycling, in decomposing organic matter, and in plant health. Without them, nothing would be able to grow. These specialized soil biomes and the complex microorganism communities that they contain would have been devastated by prolonged flooding. It would have taken years of rainfall just to purge enough salt from the soil for plants to be able to grow again. And studies of similarly devastated soil now exposed by receding glaciers have found that it takes 50 to 150 years for the soil microbiomes to be able to recover enough for bushes and trees to be able to start growing again. The thought of Noah finding a fully formed olive branch just 40 days after peak flooding is absolutely laughable. Number 9, the water itself. There's no viable mechanism to explain where all the floodwater came from or where it went afterwards. If you added enough water to cover every inch of land, including the top of Mount Everest, that would require over 3 times the amount of water currently on Earth. Where did all that water go? Because it ain't here. Number 10, written records.
Hey, all I'm gonna say, God said he opened the windows of heaven or something like that, the rafters of heaven, something weird like that verbiage. What does that even mean? You know what I'm saying? What does that even mean? If we're talking about where the water went, firstly, let's talk where did the water come from. What does that mean? Can't just say he found an olive branch and then also not talk about the fact that it's like God said he just opened a thing, right? Because we gotta look at this as it is. It would be a supernatural event, right? And that's what it is, because it's God and God is supernatural. So this would be a supernatural event. He's not given to just credit like, oh, if it's supernatural. I just say the whole thing about all this because it's a supernatural event. God would have made it to where everything would have worked in tandem with everything else and making sure that the land was still habitable for Noah and them, right? Because the original plan was to wipe out everything and just restart all over. And then he had Noah and it was like, all right, I mean, I guess we'll let you slide somewhat. But it's stuff like the dirt, the stalactites, the ice cores, whatever else he's talked about, right? God could make the water choose. Firstly, if the water would go up and go down and we don't know where it came from nor where it went, do you not think he can make the water not disturb the coral reefs and all that garbage? Like, I'm just saying. Now, I'm not saying his points are invalid, right? Because I think a lot of science is true and a lot of the case of what it does. This stuff I'm unfamiliar with, but I'm just looking at it like, okay, if it's supernatural, we got to give the credit where the credit is due in terms of God and what he could do and make possible, right? Because he's just attacking it when the majority of people don't even believe in it, right? And I don't know what he gains from doing that. And once again, I'm not trying to attack his stance or what he's choosing. I'm just saying, like, a lot of this is, it's just weird that he's attacking it, not attacking what the majority of people believe. And his points are good. His points are definitely good. I just don't know enough to combat them in a scientific way or anything. But his points are very good. I do want that to be known.
We have continuous written records and archaeological data going back over 1,000 years before the flood allegedly took place. Oh, and in multiple languages, so the Tower of Babel is BS as well. Number 11, geology. Even small local floods are easy to detect in the geological column because they leave behind not only chemical signatures, but also a very noticeable bluish layer of glade soil. And yet, despite geologists drilling extensively on every single continent, there is absolutely no global flood layer. Number 12. Flood myths. Different civilizations around the world have completely different flood myths, with vastly differing dates and details and descriptions suggesting that these were localized floods rather than a single giant global event. The flood myth in the Bible borrows almost whole cloth from the older Mesopotamian flood myths of the people who conquered them. The flood myths in the Sumerian epic of Ziusudra predate the book of Genesis by over 1,000 years. But I know what you're thinking. What about fish fossils on mountaintops? Well, this is something very well understood by science.
Hold on. Predating Genesis is not crazy because Moses wrote it, who didn't even live in the time of Genesis, right? He didn't even write that junk. So that makes sense why it's older or whatever the case is. That's okay. That's okay. I just want that to be known.
Scientists. You see, tectonic plates, the same geological plates that rub together and cause earthquakes, can slowly push together, rising upwards to form mountains. It's why the Himalayas continue to rise at a slow, gradual rate every single year, about 5 millimeters a year, but over time, that adds up. Layers of rock that were once submerged below the ocean have slowly been forced upwards, which is why fossils that were once below the water are now on mountains. The past tells a story. History leaves fingerprints and screams to us if we know how to listen. And if we know how to look, every single field of science destroys the story of Noah's Ark. There is absolutely zero evidence of a global flood and a boatload of evidence against it. And it's not just that there's no evidence of it happening, Noah's undertaking itself wouldn't just be difficult, it would be scientifically impossible. But we're gonna have to cover that in part 2. Check out my next video covering all of the reasons why Noah's Ark would be utterly impossible. Thanks for watching, and as always, dare to be curious, but don't drink the Kool-Aid.
See, you see how he's like, there's no evidence. He literally just said there's no evidence for it. And then in the next sentence, it's not that there's no evidence for it. And then stay tuned for part 2 when we go over why it's impossible. My guy, if there is no evidence or barely any evidence, why not look at that evidence and then bring it against the multitude of evidence? Why are you just disallowing all that, right? We want to see both sides. We want to be objective in our criticisms and in our studies, right? Why don't you start with the little bit of evidence there is and call it dumb and then make your 9-minute video about all the stuff other than that, right? Why not give a little bit of this? Maybe I'm missing the video. Maybe he made a video on it and maybe I'm tripping. But why not give the credit to the little bit of evidence that there is? Right? Because I say one of the biggest things for me also, right? He said that there's no global flood layer. If it were the case, it'd be the iridium layer, right? That we already talked about, the KT boundary, you know? And I had this pulled up on my phone. If I could pull it up now. All right, peep this. 104.5. At first he's just talking about the God. Bless the Lord, O my soul, the Lord my God, very great, very clothed with honor and majesty. You covered thyself with light as a garment. Who stretches out the heavens like a curtain, laid the beams of the chambers in the waters, made the clouds his chariot, walks upon the wings of the wind, makes his angels spirits his ministers of flaming fire, who laid the foundations of earth, that it should not be removed forever. Thou coverest it with the deep as with a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. At thy rebuke they fled. At the voice of thy thunder they hasted away. They go up by the mountains, they go down by the valleys, unto the place which thou hast founded for them. Thou hast set a bound that they may not pass over, that they turn not again to cover the earth. And like I said earlier, he used this word abound. Let's check what this word bound means. A border, a territory enclosed with a boundary, region, territory of darkness. What do we call, hold on, let's look it up together. KT boundary. KT boundary in arts is a Cretaceous Tertiary boundary, marks the geological boundary between the Cretaceous and Tertiary period, specifically the end of the Mesozoic area and the Cenozoic area. Approximately 66 million years ago, the boundary is characterized by a distinct layer of rock containing high concentrations of iridium associated with the mass extinction event that has wiped out the non-avian dinosaurs and other life forms. Border, KT boundary. KT territory enclosed within boundary. Landmark, quarter, space, all that type of stuff. Border, boundary, territory. Almost as if God marked an end of a period of time with this boundary and then put the rainbow in the signs of the clouds so that we knew he had a promise for us, right? And we even go to verse 14. He causes the grass to grow for the cattle, the herb for the service of man. He may bring forth food out of the earth, right? I didn't even look at this verse, but it's great because when bro was like, the dirt would need 50 to 100 years to all that. Not for God. He causes this grow for the cattle, for the herb for the service of men, that he may bring forth food out of the earth. Why? Because the dirt wouldn't have been ready if that really did happen, but he caused it all to grow. I'm just saying. And if you don't like the Noah's flood story, you don't like Jesus either, because Jesus believed in that junk, right? All them, they believed in that. That's their history for real. So I don't know, but I hope y'all enjoyed this video. Let me know what y'all think down below in the comments. I'll see you. All right, that's gonna be the end of the video. Hope you guys have yourself a fantastic rest of your day. Peace.